Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this third day of our APRE annual conference and to the APRE dialogue dedicated to cascading funding. It is a pleasure to introduce our today's guests from the side of the European Commission, Mr. Haertwich, Head of Unit Common Service for Business Process, DG RTD, and Mr. Sven Schade, Policy Officer at the DG RTD Common Policy Center, Unit Common Strategic Planning and Programming Service at the European Commission. Together with us, we have also the participation of Mr. Leonardo Pinna, Confindustria, Delegation of the EU in Brussels, and Mrs. Francesca Rizzo, Professor at Politecnico di Milano. As said, today APRE dialogue is dedicated to cascading funding. It is a type of funding that is present in different parts of Horizon Europe, and it is a fund that is distributed by a consortium previously approved and financed within a project by European Commission that distribute resources to third parties. Third parties that are companies, SMEs, startups, so entities that usually could have difficulties in accessing Horizon Europe projects, collaborative projects, because of their complexity and because they are entities that are maybe too small or are not structured to participate to big projects. On the other hand, we can say that it is for sure a SME-friendly tool in these terms that reduce administrative burden and reduce the time to grant. On the other side, there are some issues that are still open and could be discussed because the organization that acts as administrator of these resources varies. So there is an heterogeneity in the organization that are involved as a manager of these resources. And there is for sure a transfer of responsibilities and risk from the Commission to these organizations. So these are open points that are going to be discussed today. But before that, I want to give the floor to Mr. Haertwich of the European Commission to tell us what is cascading funding in details. How does it work? Where we can find information on cascading funding. So please, Mr. Haertwich, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Can you please confirm that you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. So, and thanks for the invitation and the possibility to discuss with you the subject of financial support to third parties, or as it also is known, cascade funding. I will give a very short overview, and then I think we can go into a discussion and can see what are the issues and the questions that are important to you. So, what is this cascade funding, financial support to third parties, as we abbreviated in the acronym FSTP? So, you know that we give grants to consortia. We sign grant agreements with coordinators and beneficiaries. And in that slide, this is the part that is presented in purple. So the granting authority, in most cases, one of our executive agencies, has a direct legal link in the form of the signed grant agreement between the agency and the consortium and each individual beneficiary. In the when there is the case of cascade funding, there is a second layer, meaning that the beneficiaries themselves can publish calls using funds from the grant that they have received from the Commission and can select other final recipients in cascade. And here the legal link is directly between the beneficiary issuing this cascade call and this final recipient. So there is no direct legal connection between the Commission or the executive agency and the final beneficiaries of this cascade funding. So the responsibility for managing the cascade funding is with the beneficiaries, and of course our legal documents, in particular the grant agreement, provide for special provisions for in the case of cascade funding. So where do we use it in Horizon Europe? There are basically three instances. So the first one is the European Institute of Technology, the so-called EIT, where cascade funding is the standard approach. And it is the standard approach for grants given by these knowledge and innovation communities, the KICs, to final recipients. That means in the case of the EIT, the grant goes to the KIC, and then the KIC does cascade funding in order to select and finance the final beneficiary. So there is no question of whether to use it or not in different EIT calls. It is the standard approach. The same applies to co-fund. So to actions where we, together with member states, elaborate a certain program on a certain subject. And then it is, in the first instance, the national agencies who organize then the cascade calls, who are our direct beneficiaries, and the national agencies then publish the calls in cascade. And we should also say that in the case of co-fund, of course, a big part of the grant is dedicated to cascade funding, because this is the very purpose of most of these projects, to publish calls in cascade. And then the third instance is the one that interests us today most, I had understood, which is the use of cascade funding in normal, so to say, collaborative projects in Pillar 2. So in research and innovation actions, and coordination and support actions. Here, it is not the standard approach. So this cascade funding can be used only if it is decided and particularly announced in the respective call topic via the work program decision. And there is also a limit given to us by the EU financial regulation that usually the amount to be given to a final beneficiary in cascade is limited to 60,000 euros. If this amount is supposed to be exceeded, it has also to be specifically decided in the work program and announced in the call topic. So I will not go through all the small print on that slide, just to point you to the instances of the legal framework where cascade funding is supported from. So of course there is an article first in the EU financial regulation, it's Article 204. Then there is the provision that Horizon Europe can use cascade funding in the so-called Horizon Europe general annexes. And it specifies in particular for the Pillar 2 what I said, that it has to be announced specifically in the call conditions. And then we have, of course, if cascade funding is used, special provisions in the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. So if you want to know more details, it is in Article 6.2d1 and Article 9.4, where the obligations and rights of the beneficiaries who then do the cascade funding are fixed. So one of the obligations of a beneficiary who does cascade funding is that they have to create transparency on the calls published in cascade. And for this, we provide a function via our electronic grant management system to announce these cascade calls also on our funding and tenders portal in the same way as we announce the so to say primary calls that are published by the Commission itself. And I show you here a screenshot from the view of a beneficiary when he or she goes to the participant portal and starts managing his or her grant. So you log in to the funding and tenders portal, and then you have on the left-hand side always this list of menus starting with my. And among them you have also an entry called My Projects on the left-hand side. And you then go to the particular project. So here the list is also very long because this is a test account. Normally you have possibly one or two projects that you are involved in. And on the right-hand side, at any of these projects, there is a button called Actions. And if you click on that button Actions, and if the call and you as a beneficiary have the option of Cascade Funding activated, then you have under the actions, one action which is called Manage the Cascade Funding Calls. And if you click on this, you come to a very simple web screen where you have to put in the basic information related to the call that you want to publish. This is then sent to the Commission project officer, who will look at that call, see whether everything is according to the rules. And once this is the case, the executive agency or Commission project officer pushes a button, and this call gets automatically published on our funding and tenders portal. And the next slide shows you the view from the point of view of somebody who wants to find a Cascade call and wants to apply to a beneficiary in Cascade. So what you do as a potential applicant for such a Cascade call, you just go to the funding and tenders portal as normal. You go to find funding opportunities, and then you land in this page listing thousands of call topics in all sorts of programs. And there is one entry on the left-hand side, which is called call type, which also has a drop-down list. And within these drop-down lists, you find the call type Cascade Funding calls. And then you click on it, and you will get a list of all the Cascade Funding calls that are available. And then you can choose. What you can also do, if you don't know anything about all this, you can just use the general search for call topics, and so search by keywords, and then the search will bring you all the calls, no matter which types of calls, that are related to your area of interest, to the keywords that you have put in. And this will be then, of course, a mixture of normal calls and Cascade calls, and you can choose from them. So that it is from the side of potential applicants. Next slide shows what you have to do in terms of reporting. So if you are a beneficiary, having issued a Cascade call, having selected final secondary recipients, and then they start working, in the periodic reporting for our grants, if Cascade funding is activated, you will have one additional tab in this long list of tabs here on the top, which is called Report Cascade Funding. And when you click on this, you come into a screen which asks you for information on the funding in Cascade, which will in particular be to list the final recipients and the money they get and so on and so forth, meaning that we in the Commission or in the executive agencies will, once this reporting has taken place, also have at least basic information on what are the beneficiaries and what are the type of activities that happen in these Cascade grants. Now, you might want to ask, how widespread is this in Pillar 2? You will see from the figures on that slide that it is not a standard approach used everywhere. So we have currently, this is all very preliminary data, so please don't quote this anywhere further. We have done a very quick extraction from our databases. So we see that there are currently 177 primary beneficiaries, so the ones with whom we sign grants, in 122 projects in Pillar 2, having budgets for financial support to third parties. And this budget in these projects for financial support to third parties, Cascade funding, is about 400 million, which is in these grants where Cascade funding is allowed, it represents about a quarter of the budget for these projects. But if we compare it to all the projects that were signed in Pillar 2 so far, this is in the order of 2,000 at the moment, with about 13 billion funding, the conclusion is that cascade funding is used in about 5% of the projects of Pillar 2, using about 3% of the budget. So it is really used where it is applicable and not as a standard method of funding our grants. And I think with this, I finish my introduction, and I'm looking forward to the questions together with my colleague Sven Schade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haertwich, for this overview of the scheme and the technicalities also. We have a question from the online participant. If the cascading grant call is to be published by a public body, does the procedure fall under the state aid regulation scheme? Please, Mr. Haertwich.
So I think all our funding is in principle in the Horizon program, exempt from this state aid regulation. But I have to admit I am not an expert on this. I can only take note and go back to our legal experts. But I mean, the provisional indication that it will not fall under it, but to be confirmed.
Okay, thank you very much. So we take note also of this question. I want to address now to Mr. Pinna. You represent an association of companies of the industrial sector, Confindustria, and your daily work is to assist companies and orient them, provide also information on the existing tool to finance their research and innovation projects. So my question is, from one side, from the perspective of companies, how it is Cascading Fund perceived? Do the companies understand this scheme, and which is the impact for them in financing innovation projects? And on the other side, from the perspective of your association, which are the elements to which you want to bring the attention in terms of efficiency of the scheme and to have a more effective impact of the scheme for the entrepreneurial dimension?
Good morning, Stefania. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me today. And let me thank Peter as well for the valuable presentation. He gave us already lots of information and lots of clarification. And thank you for your question. I think it's one of the main points for the Cascade Funding. I think that to really evaluate the interest and the impact of Cascade Funding in the industrial world, so for companies, it is indeed necessary to consider these two layers. The one of companies intending to respond to the open call, and the other, the beneficiaries or consortia that publish and have the responsibility to manage the open call. So, as far as companies are concerned, and especially for SMEs, there is centrally a growing interest in Cascade Funding. As Confindustria, from the very beginning of Horizon Europe, but even in Horizon 2020, we have been actively involved in promoting the Cascade Funding. For example, in the last couple of years, together with our nodes within the Enterprise Europe Network, we have organized a series of webinars aimed to raise awareness about these opportunities. And actually, more and more of our associations are interested in working and managing projects that provide Cascade Funding. So, having said this, we think that in this current period, there are not so many dedicated instruments for SMEs. Or let me put even more clear, there are not so many instruments where SMEs play a leading role in the project. So we think that there is a growing interest on open calls also for this reason. Sometimes open calls are seen as substitute, a way to overcome this lack. It is clear and very clear, and we are very supportive on this, that open calls offer for sure a series of advantages for SMEs. For instance, simplified administrative procedure and application schemes which are suitable for SMEs. A much shorter time to grant compared to other traditional EU projects. Open call provide an adequate budget, not so big, not so small, for small-scale projects. There is for sure an acquisition of valuable skills that are useful to participate in traditional call for proposal. Through open calls, there is an inclusion in a network of organizations which are already active in European projects, and this is valuable for SMEs. And then there is less competition than in a traditional call for proposal. So for SMEs, there is a high likelihood for obtaining funding. Therefore, let me be frank, cascade funding mechanisms represent a useful tool to enable businesses. However, it is also necessary to consider a series of criticalities or risks in the use, or better to say, in the abuse of cascade funding. Firstly, we think that cascade funding cannot become either a substitute for traditional Horizon Europe calls or an excuse for not involving SMEs that are capable of developing innovation and therefore playing an important role in the European innovation ecosystem. I want here to emphasize that the role of SMEs in EU projects should not be limited to small-scale projects derived from open call. In the previous programming period, SMEs were able and demonstrated so to lead large-scale projects, 2 million euros or 2,500,000 euros project. Peter already told us that we are not using open calls everywhere, but we have to be clear on this, and I think for the Commission it is necessary to clarify then the objective and the scope of cascade funding. Having said that there are undoubtedly useful tools, they cannot be used for any purpose and in every context. Open calls should aim to fund complementary activity, we think, which couldn't otherwise be performed. Clarifying the scope of cascade funding is also essential in order to avoid overlapping with national and regional instruments, such as the RRF, the PNRR, or other funds, other indirect management. If you see the implementation of our PNRR, there are lots of cascade funding, which is good as well. But we have to be sure to address technological issue with the right instruments. Thirdly, it is important to remind that there are still some difficulties for third parties user to access those fundings. Peter showed us the funding internet portal. We really appreciate how the Commission improve the information on cascade fundings. But having said this, again, I have to say that there is still room for improvement. There is always room for improvement. But if we see the funding intended portal, inside the funding intended portal, we found two different pages, web pages, where open calls are where we can find open calls. The one that Peter showed us, we think it's very updated, but there is another one which is the competitive calls and calls for third parties that sometimes it's not that updated and can be misleading for SMEs that try to find information on this instrument. Okay. Then, on the second part of your question, I will be brief. So, the layer of winning consortia. There are some criticalities as well. First of all, we think that it is essential to ensure the certainty of funding for third-party beneficiary and to clarify the responsibility for the management of the funds. For example, is it the consortium or the executive agency or the commission that is responsible for third parties project? The role of agency in the financial support of third parties should be clarified in order to avoid the creation of gray zone, where seems sometimes that no entity is responsible for potential problems which may arise during the projects. Here as well, I have to admit, I have to say that lots of improvement has been done from the Commission, but there are still we are still experiencing some problems. Secondly, we need to stress the importance of coherence between EU policies and projects. It is very important to ensure a stronger coherence between policies and instruments. Just two questions. How does the Commission is going to evaluate the impact of cascade fundings? One thing is how much money do we spend, another is how do we spend this money. So the impact of third parties project should be measured by the Commission or the consortium. For us, this is very important. Again, and this is my last point, it is of utmost importance to ensure the cascade funding is functional to the implementation of transformative projects. In order to achieve this, it is necessary to think more systematic perspective. For instance, it would be desirable to create a community, maybe an open communities of entities which are capable of managing cascade funding. For example, following the experience of the Enterprise Europe networks or the European Digital Innovation Hubs, or again, the Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs, it is important to create a community, to build up on this community and implementing capacity building activities for such entities. The entities that implement cascade funding should be assisted, and capacity building is fundamental, and creating communities is also important. And to do so, maybe a suggestion could be to foresee a longer duration for projects. So thank you. These are my first point, and I'm ready for questions and then to discuss with other panelists.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pinna. I recall some points that you mentioned in your speech. From the one side, the need not to limit the participation of companies only to small-scale projects, to cascading funding, but to see it also as a way to involve companies that otherwise would not participate, to create also a capacity building in applying, participating to Horizon Europe projects. The need of clarifying the scope to avoid overlapping with other tools, other financial scheme is for sure a key point on that. And on this purpose, I would give the floor also to Mrs. Francesca Rizzo, professor of Politecnico di Milano. Politecnico di Milano is managing cascading funding projects, so they act as administrator of these resources and are in relation with the third entity for the cascading. And on this purpose, I would ask you, from one side, as a project manager of Cascading Funding project, which is your experience in terms recalling also the complexity of the management, and to understand if we can have not only a user-friendly tools, but also a grant manager-friendly tools. And on the other side, recalling the perspective of companies, which is the value generated for the third entities that participate to the cascading funding. So which is the added value for the innovation project? Does it create the value, and how, according to your experience, of course?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Stefania, for the introduction and for the question. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you. Also, thank you to the previous speakers for the frameworking, let's say, the area of the cascade funding. Yes, as you mentioned, Politecnico di Milano has a strong experience in cascade funding projects. And here I would like to report the experience not only directly by me as a coordinator of a project with cascade funding, but also of other colleagues in the university. So I would like to speak and present the experience of the entire university here. Well, of course, there are pros and cons with respect to this kind of tool, and some of them have been already pointed out by the colleague from Confindustria. And as a public entity, as a public body, of course, in managing this kind of instrument as a coordinator of a project, can be something that is, let's say, impacting heavily on the activities of the coordinator in terms of administrative procedures that we have to put in place in these cases, which is something that it's on the shoulder of our administrative staff, and of course it's using a lot of the resources in terms of personal amounts of projects like these in being really involved in technical staffs that can make time by time difficult to bring on the projects, which is of course something that in a sense is a pity, because what is one of the objective value of this kind of project is the fact that universities can directly interact with different entities outside or in the external environments, and with this kind of tool really approaching on-site or context dependency, let's call it in this way, piloting and experiments that are of added value because are experience conducted in the reality of the innovation environments in which a university is normally playing an important role. I'm referring here, of course, to the quadruple helix model. I would like to stress the fact that tools like this are supporting university, but also other bodies to become more, to engaging more and even more directly with different actors in the external environments. So this is a positive aspect, even though the kind of effort in managing all of the administrative issues is at the moment very important, and there is, let's say, some kind of even prevention from the research perspective to take care of this kind of let's say, process, because it's very much linked to what is a bit, let's say, outside of the typical research or innovation activities expected to be conducted under research and innovation projects. I'm referring explicitly and especially on the experience that as a Politecnico di Milano we had under the cluster 2, as mentioned from the previous, the first speakers, even though we had experience in KIC as a beneficiary of that kind of funds, and also in other implementation projects of the Cascade funding. I would like really to bring here the perspective of a research entity in doing with these kind of instrument beyond the managing aspects, and to enter a bit more into the value, as Stefania was saying, of these kind of projects. And also, previously, the colleague from Confindustria was mentioning the need of monitoring the impact of these projects. Here is something very relevant as a research institution. I must say that the biggest value, of course, for a public research institution is to exploit this tool, as I said before, to establish the connection with the external environment to conduct on the field research from one side, which is very important and very relevant. What is limiting, in a sense, at the moment, the value of this kind of project, I would like to mention two aspects. Is one, the cap that these projects have in cluster 2, because you cannot fund more than 60K to these third-party entities, and depending on which kind of piloting or pilots, let's call these third parties projects in this way, depending on what they are doing, on what they are implementing, of course, this can be a reasonable amount of money, or it can be completely out of scope. Think about building a demonstrator, building a prototype, supporting some new entities to scaling up with a new business idea and try to enter into a market. These are really complex processes that this kind of support in terms of resources cannot be adequate. Adequate to both conduct the pilot as well as to accompany this pilot towards, let's say, sustainability or a scaling pathways. The point is, what will be about these projects after the end of the support from the Cascade funding? The second aspect I would like really to stress is the one of the impact. The one of the impact, not only in terms of, as has been previously said, which is the outcome of the use of this money which are releasing this project, a startup, an SME, something that is sustainable in the external environment or in the innovation ecosystem. But it's also an issue. There is also an issue of the kind of research results that you can obtain, an impact in terms of the scientific aspect that this kind of project can bring. I'm feeling here a bit, let's say, I don't have a kind of an answer. What I can say is that it would be needed or to have in place, to put in place mechanisms for monitoring and evaluating the outcomes and impacts of these projects beyond the 3 years of funding that can be the normal, let's say, rationale for this kind of projects, in terms of scientific impact, as well as the economical impact and the societal impact, because it's also the truth that many of these pilots are used by public entities, by university, even to pursue the third mission, which is about engaging the civil society in the process of research and innovation. This is something which is missing. So using the cascade funding per se, of course, as I said, has advantages and disadvantages, but the point is still the need of really understand the effectiveness of this kind of instrument from at least the three perspectives I mentioned before. I will stop here, Stefania. I don't know if you want me to add something more, or I can give you back the
Thank
floor.
you very much, Mrs. Rizzo. You have highlighted some relevant points, both from the side of management, mentioning the efforts that the organization that manages cascading funding need to put into place to manage the open calls and all the administrative issues. So we can discuss further on these aspects, and also from the I would say more technical point of view of the project, mentioning the cap of the 60,000 euro per financial resources provided to the third party, that could be somehow limiting the impact of this project. So maybe it is something that we can discuss also with the European Commission. And to mention, as Mr. Pinna did, also the importance of the monitoring, because having information on these aspects allow us to highlight also a strategic perspective of cascading funding. So on this regard, I would ask to Mr. Haertwich if you think that is maybe appropriate to have an internal assessment of the cascading funding. Maybe you can tell us when we could have a reporting of this project to have some data on which we can work on. And if an assessment in this term is a possible action that we can do in a very collaborative way to provide support also to European Commission to get inputs on that. Just some words, Mr. Haertwich. Lo sento.
The reporting of what happens in these cascade of projects is a part of our project reporting. We collect information, and then, of course, the project office in the agencies have to assess this as part of the normal project monitoring. But of course, there is the other aspect of monitoring the impact at the level of the whole program. And here, first, I'm not the specialist for this, so there are other colleagues in the Commission. And second, it is still the very early days of Horizon Europe. So even for the monitoring of individual projects, the vast majority of grants signed in Horizon Europe just come to the first reporting period. So we don't have yet many data on actually what is happening in these cascade grants, because there was not yet much reporting. So it's a bit early. But I would assume at the level of program monitoring that this will become a normal aspect in, for instance, the midterm review of Horizon Europe. But I don't think we can be more specific and more detailed at this very moment. We take, of course, note that there is an interest in having more information on impact. I will feed this back to the colleagues in the Commission dealing with the program monitoring, and then we will take it from there.
Thank you.
And there was also the question, I think, on the... Sorry.
Thank you very much. You answered to our question, so we wait for the reporting in due time. So when the data will be available, we will be happy to continue the analysis of the impact and to provide also our feedback. I stay with you, Mr. Haertwich, because we have two questions from the audience. The first one The beneficiary who don't manage cascade funding in a collaborative project can participate to cascade calls from other beneficiaries of the same project. This is the first one. If you want to answer to this, and then I come to the second.
Yes. Again, I cannot give a definite answer because this is a legal question that requires specialist knowledge. But as far as I remember, the answer is no. So you cannot be a direct beneficiary and at the same time a beneficiary in Cascade.
Okay. They are very technical questions.
Yes.
Are there specific rules for eligibility of costs sustained by beneficiary of cascading grants? Is it foreseen through financial reporting?
You have to apply basically the same rules in this cascade funding as we apply in the main grant. And this applies also to the eligibility of costs.
Okay. So, if there
and
are
the
no
financial reporting, there is a second part to the question. So the financial reporting is, of course, to the beneficiary and not to the commission or executive agency. So it's the responsibility of the beneficiary to organize and provide the rules for the financial reporting, having in mind that our rules should apply.
Thank you. Following the speeches of Mrs. Rizzo and Mr. Pinna, I would like to ask them to identify three key aspects, three keywords as messages also for the European Commission that you want to bring in with particular attention to the discussion for the future. So, which are, Mr. Pinna and then Mrs. Rizzo, the three main points that you want to highlight and put on the table of a further discussion with the EU?
Thank you, Stefania. So, three main messages that I think summarize what I previously said and also what Professor Rizzo underlined in her speech, and I thank her very, very much. So, cascade funding is for sure a useful tool for businesses. And we have seen there are lots of advantages. And one is important for us. And this is the biggest request in the midterm review of the Horizon Europe, which is, again, simplification. We think precisely that due to their simpler administrative procedures, cascade funding should be considered as a model for structuring other programs in the future, even FP10. So let's take in mind this point. Simplification and cascade funding is easy. Then second one. Cascade funding, for the cascade funding to give their space, their role in the innovation ecosystem or research and innovation ecosystem, is important to clarify objectives and scope. Then the third one, cascade funding, again, cannot become a substitute for traditional call for proposals or an excuse for not involving SMEs in a leading role of traditional projects. So, we really think that is important again when Commission clarified the scope to give the right dimension for SMEs in the program. Cascade funding, but not only cascade funding. Thank you very much, Stefania.
Thank you, Mr. Pinna. I give also the opportunity to Mrs. Rizzo to identify the three key aspects that we want to let to the EU Commission.
Thank you, Stefania. And yes, I would like maybe to build up on what Dr. Pinna just said, at least for 2 of the 3 messages. I would like to go a bit on the idea of framing the objectives and the scope of this project. Very much agree with these. And from a pragmatic perspective, I would suggest even to be flexible with the cap to this project, depending on the objectives and on the scopes. One thing is to fund a big demonstrator, which is asking for a lot of money. Another thing is to support capability building into an acceleration process. Just to give you 2 different examples of at least in the experience of Politecnico di Milano. We had both, of course. The second one is about simplification. Totally agree again with this aspect. Please consider that at least in Italy, but I don't know about the other countries, when we issue a call under the cascade funding mechanism, we have to be compliant with the national rules plus the EU level rules. So please, if you can find an agreement just to say, okay, only EU rules or only Italian rules, it would be great, because the 2, of course, means for us to stay in control of 2 different levels of governance. Let's call it in this way. The third message is very much from the research perspective, meaning that it would be great if the Commission can fund projects that are observing these cascade funding mechanisms and the quality, as I said before, of the impacts in terms of the 3 main impacts that the Commission figured out at the beginning of Horizon Europe, which means economical, societal, and scientific. Please, let's try to fund projects, research projects explicitly devoted to go back on what we already did. Cascade funding was already in place also in Horizon 2020. It was a smaller implementation, but it was already there. And as Peter said, we are at the beginning, let's say, of the first reporting period of many Horizon Europe projects, but maybe this is the right moment to fund a couple of projects that can be really the observer and going back, stock take from what we did and analyze, to give to the Commission, but also to the implementers, let's say, information, data on which to base our decisions.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Rizzo. I want to let Mr. Peter Haertwich to comment this last point of our discussion. So to keep an eye on the objectives and the scope of the cascading funding scheme, they need to not to exclude, of course, companies from other projects within Horizon, the collaborative projects, and the need also to have a flexible, maybe, approach with the CAP to generate increased added value for the finance project, and of course the importance of monitoring the impact. So last comments from your side, Mr. Haertwich.
Yes, so indeed on this 60,000 euros, as I said at the beginning, this is the general rule. There can be exceptions if it is decided in the work program, and there are exceptions in several cases. So it really depends on the purpose in each individual case of this cascade funding, and there can be higher amounts. And then, of course, I take home and report back to the responsible colleagues this strong interest in having a proper assessment of the impact of the cascade funding, and this will feed certainly into the midterm review of Horizon Europe. And then finally, I would maybe emphasize again that with this cascade funding, we will not replace the normal grant funding directly to beneficiaries, including to SMEs. You see from the figures that it is a relatively small amount and a relatively small number of projects, even in pillar 2 that are concerned. There is no intention to push this up to much higher levels. And the decision is, of course, always on the base of the need and the intentions and the objectives in a certain core topic. And finally, I should insist with everybody, and in particular the grant beneficiaries implementing such as cascade calls, that we push very much for transparency. So we make sure via this obligatory publication of the cascade calls in the portal that in principle everybody can find these calls and can apply. And of course we also encourage the beneficiaries to do everything possible at their level to widely announce that they have published such calls and make it possible for any interested party to apply. That's it from my side.
Thank you very much for this openness also to the discussion and to take into consideration all the aspects that have been highlighted by our speakers, and also this level of flexibility to adjust and improve a tool, a scheme that is for sure useful and valuable, because it provides really an advantage to involve a wider range of beneficiaries in Horizon Europe program. And I want to stress also the last part that you said, Ms. Haertwich, about the transparency, because we are talking about public money. So we have to provide equal opportunity to access this kind of resources. So from the side of the organization that manages Cascading Funding, this is a key point and a guarantee also for all the beneficiaries and SMEs that want to approach Cascading Funding. So the transparency and the visibility also of the opportunities, I think it is a very important point. So I want to stress, as you did, this aspect. So I want to thank you all our speakers, our guests, for the discussion. At the moment, I don't see questions in a Slido. But I want to assure that this topic will be further developed and discussed within APRE and its members, for sure. And as was announced during the second day of the APRE National Conference, a dedicated working group is going to be launched at the beginning of next year. And our members will be involved, so we will have the opportunity to exchange experiences and our knowledge also regarding the use of the cascading funding, the feedback from our companies, and to provide the EU Commission with suggestions from our side or inputs and feedback in order to continue a very collaborative discussion with you and to share our expertise to improve this tool that, as I said, is extremely useful for the territories. So we want really to increase the efficiency and the impact of this tool, also waiting for the results of the monitoring. So thank you very much again, Mr. Haertwich, Mr. Pinna, and Mrs. Rizzo. I thank you also the online participant to this APRE dialogue, and I wish you all a nice day. So goodbye, and
thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.